Hey friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. This is your host, Ashley Stahl. I'm a counterterrorism professional turned career coach, speaker, and Forbes blogger, and I created the U-Turn Podcast because, let's face it, every now and again we realize that we're living life on autopilot and it's time to wake up and make that U-turn in your life. So prepare to go deep with some of the most transformational people I know, here to help you grow and upgrade your mindset, whether it's in work or love. In the meantime, we've opened up access to 3 free e-courses on uturnpodcast.com. So head on over there if you want to land a new job you love, find your purpose, or launch your dream business. All of these courses are totally free. All you got to do is head on over to uturnpodcast.com. That's YOUTURN podcast.com. Now let's get started with this week's guest.
It's almost like two ships in a night, where it's like you're both trying, like the desire is there, but you kind of like miss each other. And so what ends up happening is resentment then starts to come about because I'm doing everything I can, or what I think to make you happy, but it's not working. So you're kind of both resentful in a sense. You want to do what works for your partner. And to do that means, as you just said before, asking a lot of questions. Why do they feel that way? What do they think about that? What about that was upsetting? Like if you and I were in a relationship and I did something to upset you, it's not just to apologize to kind of appease your partner and be done with it. It's wanting to figure out what happened, but also what could I have done instead?
Hey U-Turners, it's Ash here, and I have a guest for you in the love category, and we are talking about something that is pleasantly broad because I know that it applies to so many of you, and it's the traits of a healthy relationship. So whether you're dating somebody, whether you're single, I think that it's so important to really evaluate and check in with these, and that's why I wanted to bring Dina Mandell onto the show. She's a dating coach, a relationship expert. She puts tons of good content out there on this topic, and I'm so excited to ask her about 5 traits for a healthy relationship. My only wish is that we had a 2-hour podcast on this. So Dina, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. What got you interested in studying or just working in the world of love?
So when I was 10, I actually saved a girl's life from suicide. And I realized, not necessarily then, but more in my teen years, that was not necessarily normal and that I had some sort of natural ability. And I definitely wanted to help people and have my own business. And I was a bit of a shit magnet in my 20s and made a lot of mistakes. And was helping other people.
I've never heard somebody call themselves a shit magnet. That's incredible.
Oh. I definitely was. And I think I was so busy helping everyone else that I kind of wasn't really being my own client. And I kind of came to this like very, very low rock bottom moment and decided to become my own client, really more because I didn't know what else to do as opposed to thinking it was a good idea. And I absolutely changed my life and met an amazing man within just a few months. And it's just such a huge part of what we do. And, as love, it's really love and work are 2 of like the biggest parts of our lives. And people are really getting it wrong. And I think it's getting worse and it's getting better. So I think the need for it really exists, where I kind of take a lot of my therapy background and, kind of practical sense of dating and kind of combine that and help my clients.
Beautiful. And I love how often people work on themselves and it turns into them finding the right partner soon. I have the same story. So I love that. I mean, not with the suicide, not with the shitstorm in the 20s. Well, kind of with the shitstorm, but, but as far as like stopping the habits or the patterns that were getting me attracted to people that weren't good for me and really focusing. So I love that there is information like this out there. And I know that sometimes information doesn't mean transformation, but I think that a conversation like this, you never know who's listening. So you'd mentioned that the first trait when we were talking around a healthy relationship was communication. And I heard you starting to say that there was 2 types. I don't know if I'm mistaken. Yeah. Tell me, I'm so into this.
Yeah. So communication just in general is not an easy thing for a lot of people. It is a skill and not everyone is sort of quote unquote born with it. I think a lot of people are not good at communicating themselves just from a vulnerability aspect and expressing themselves. But then also on the other end is, on the receiving end of listening. So it tends to be, because a lot of people will kind of wait for their turn to speak instead of actually really listen to someone else. So we're kind of bad generally on both ends. There's always work to be done. But then in terms of the two specific forms, most people stop with the first one, which is daily communication. So that's basically when you're talking about, what came up in your day, you're speaking about work, your kids, if you have them, family, friends, kind of like basic daily updates. Mm-hmm. And people often think, when I talk to couples, that that's kind of it. And while that's obviously really important, we all need to kind of check in and talk about our day and update each other and so forth. The second part is kind of eliminated, and that's emotional communication. And that's where you're discussing your feelings, your thoughts, your wants, your needs, you're offering and providing feedback to one another about how you're feeling. That's not happening. And not necessarily that you need to, daily like cry together and hold each other and have these like deep, meaningful, crazy conversations. But you do want to understand, generally speaking, how someone is feeling. And obviously, as we know, based on just experiences and mood and circumstances, we kind of can't predict them, and they can be a bit different, week to week, month to month, that kind of thing. So it's really being able to kind of check in with each other and just seeing how you're doing. It's like taking each other's temperature in a sense.
And what are some ways to invite somebody into that kind of conversation? Because I know the day-to-day conversation can feel easy. It's like, what did you do today? How was the day? There's so many linguistic keys that people are typically in with their day of talking to their partner about today. But I'm guessing people who are listening are like, how do you start a conversation? Like, not everybody's like me, or maybe even like you, Diana, where I look at my partner and I'm like, where do you think we go after all this? Like, that's a normal question for me. What are some suggestions you have?
So a few things. So we're actually going to be talking the third step. We're going to be talking a bit more about what to actually practically do to sit down and have an actual conversation around it. So we'll get into that. But in terms of kind of, working towards that, or at least getting better at it, it's even just, taking your daily communication and putting more emphasis or feeling behind it, not just sort of listing things out almost like in bullet point form. It's like, I did this, I had this happen, I talked to this person, It's more about saying those things, but then also attaching something to it, about maybe how it made you feel or what you think about it, or even asking your partner for feedback on something. I talked to my best friend and updated her on this, and that we were fighting, and I said this to her. So a lot of times it's really more about like updating as opposed to kind of checking in and actually talking to each other about it. So like, this is what I said, what do you think? Or this is what I said, this is how she made me feel. It's not just sort of reporting, it's talking, in a deeper sense about it, and kind of being able to explore back and forth about that. A lot of people were just sort of not good at expressing ourselves. And I think even, it's as simple as doing like a free write journaling at night and just kind of letting out exactly how you feel. Sometimes I think we want to express ourselves, but we almost don't even know exactly what is happening. So when you kind of identify a bit more about how you're feeling and you're checking in with yourself, you're then able to share with your partner a lot better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I also was just thinking about how my partner, one question that I hear him ask all the time, I laugh every time he says it, is, what do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. And it's so true.
And yeah, like he'll be like, I had this kind of conversation at work. It was kind of stressful. But I don't know. I think a lot of things. What do you think about all that? And it's like, it's so interesting, what is possible when you know how to start a conversation, and I had a mentor, Jay Abraham, a long time ago, and he used to say to me, you want to have better relationships, ask better questions. And I think open-ended questions are so powerful. So that's great. And then beyond communication, like you talk about understanding each other was another trait of a healthy relationship. And I feel like this is a really deep one because there's so much to me that goes into understanding somebody and feeling understood. How do you kind of gauge if you understand each other?
So I think first the desire is to be there to want you. And that may sound sort of, counterintuitive, kind of like, wouldn't you want to? It's like, no, not everyone really does because it is work. And I think oftentimes we think, well, it's treat others the way we want to be treated, right? It's kind of how we learn, how we grow. Like that's what we were grown up, to believe, the golden rule. But it's really about doing what works for someone else, because what you want doesn't necessarily mean what your partner wants, or maybe it is, but it's not in the same way. So, what I often see happen is it's almost like two ships in a night, where it's like you're both trying, like the desire is there, but you kind of like miss each other. And so what ends up happening is resentment then starts to come about, because I'm doing everything I can, or what I think, to make you happy, but it's not working. So you're kind of both resentful in a sense. So you want to do what works for your partner. And to do that means, as you just said before, asking a lot of questions. Why do they feel that way? What do they think about that? What about that was upsetting? Like if you and I were in a relationship and I did something to upset you, it's not just to apologize to kind of appease your partner and be done with it. It's wanting to figure out what happened, but also what could I have done instead? You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're really trying to get into this person's mind and understand their triggers and their pet peeves and what's, really, really important to them. And it can't be based on, what your ex wanted, or, what you were brought up to believe, or what you think about something. That obviously matters, but you need to validate your partner and understand what they need to be happy. And then even a step further from that is to be able to then anticipate their needs, which is kind of even cooler, because you end up then avoiding a lot of sort of unnecessary drama just from either assuming something or just, again, kind of completely missing the boat on each other, but sort of wanting to get there.
Yeah, I find that so many people tend to check out after they don't feel heard. Or what are some things that you think people do that block and they don't even realize they're blocking the understanding of each other?
I think a lot of it is going in with sort of your own experiences. It's easy to kind of assume something. It's easy to fall back on old patterns even. If you date one person who likes certain things and then you date someone else who likes very different things, we're kind of, again, like assuming certain things. Or thinking, if they're dating me, they love me, they're going to like, what I want to do, or they'll like it in the way that I like it. And that's not necessarily true. So again, I think a lot of it is sort of assuming things, or, thinking that the intention is good, but it's not actually kind of forming in the way that we want to or towards the other person. Like you're taking two completely different people that were generally raised in, different places, often we're different genders. We want different things. We grew up with different things. We have different experiences. We have different fears. And you're kind of like taking these two people and like slapping them together and be like, okay, make it work.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest thing in the world to kind of, make that work. And so to be able to do that is kind of, eliminating everything you sort of ever knew worked, and taking sort of like this person in a silo, like, in an individual type of place, and just learning everything, because you really start over, in any relationship that you're in. You really don't know this person at all initially. And so the dating phase is kind of like first of just like, do I like this person? Can I potentially see long-term with them? And then being in a relationship is like, how do we make this work as best as we possibly can? And it does take time and effort and energy, for people to say like relationships shouldn't be work. It's like, it is, you know what I mean? It's being proactive and, putting in that time, putting in that effort, and, doing sweet things for them on a random day. And I mean, it is, it shouldn't be like work, but it is effort and it is time, and it has to, be there in order for your relationship to grow. It's kind of like a plant. Do you kind of stick it in the corner and, see what happens to it? Or do you, look at the soil and do you, water it, and do you put it in the sunlight and take it out when it feels like there's too much sun? It's kind of really assessing what the needs are and then giving into it to have it flourish.
Yeah. Well, and I also just can't help but think like everybody needs something different. And I'm so curious for everybody listening around timelines, because I've had relationships that are 5 years, and then in the whole time I felt like, okay, maybe this isn't it. And then now I'm in one and it's been 7 months and I know it's right for me. So what is your feedback for people who kind of have that experience? Because I think a lot of women, there's many different camps. There's people who walk down the aisle and they didn't really know they were the right person until they did, And then there's people who both knew right away. And then there's situations where one knew and the other one didn't. So what are your thoughts on like honeymoon phases and what it takes to really get to know somebody, and that whole phenomenon of when you know?
So I mean, even going back a second, something that you said, the one, right?
Yeah.
And, the soulmate, I just don't believe in that.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of dating coaches do, or people in the relationship space, I mean, most do. And again, we use the word soulmate and the one a lot. I don't believe that there's one person out there for everyone. I think that's almost like terrible way for us to think about things. It's like, how, of like the millions and millions and millions of people, am I going to find that one person? If I'm supposed to find one person, like where are they? You know what I mean? Like, how do you even find that? So to me, it's, I'm not saying there are millions of people out there that I think are going to be there for you, or be the right, person for you. But I think, my husband and I have an amazing relationship. I think if we didn't meet, like, we'd both be with someone else, what I'm saying, and be very happy. It would just be a slightly different relationship because of, just personality and experience and all of that. But it doesn't make it a lesser relationship. It just makes it a different one. So I think the pressure that we put on ourselves to find this sort of like ideal, person is kind of ridiculous. And then you wonder, with that idea in your head, well, like, is this the right person? Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's sort of like, there's supposed to be one. How do I know that this is the one or not?
Yeah.
So I think, that's something that we need to really like take away, from sort of our vocabulary and just our understanding of things, because people end up just with that pressure of making mistakes and sort of sabotaging and second guessing and trying to always find better. There's a lot of sort of issues, especially now, I'd say more than ever, just because people are so at our fingertips in a way that, a while ago they just weren't.
Well, there's also this idea of like, and I'm on the total same page as you. Like, I just think we live on an abundant planet. There's billions of humans. There's not right or wrong. There's just different with connections. But I know that sometimes people, like, they date and they never find a connection that feels right, even if it's not the one. And so, like, what thoughts do you have about like somebody being able to decide if something's right for them? And just this idea that some people date for 10 years and decide to get married. Other people know within 6 months. Like, what is your feedback on that for everybody listening? Because I know some couples that they're like, we met and got married in 3 months and we're celebrating our 30-year anniversary. And then other ones, it's like, it never was working. It took them years to make the decision. Like, curious just what you feel about timelines.
Yeah, I think for everyone it's different. And I don't think that one is sort of right over another. It's hard to really say that, whether
totally.
It's 3 months or, 10 years, let's say, like you said. I think it's more, based upon, the work that you've done ahead of time with just trying to figure out what it is that you want in a partner, and not just from a perspective of sort of adjectives, and almost like a checklist in a sense. Especially women are very sort of good at doing that. It's not just because, generally speaking, more or less, we all kind of want the same things. A person who's, funny and charismatic and ambitious and kind and thoughtful and humble, and right. But it's like, what does that mean to you, though? Because like my sense of humor could be very different from yours, and my ambitious can be very different from yours. So I think it's really about dialing in, what you really want, in a partner, but like specifically what you want, and what are the most important things versus things that you could give a little bit more of a room for. So I think it depends on, your age. I think it depends on how much you know yourself. Generally, people in their 30s and 40s end up getting married faster because they, have kind of lived a bit. They've probably had their heart broken. They've probably been in long-term relationships versus someone who's in their 20s who will probably, more so second guess themselves, possibly wear their heart on their sleeve a little bit more. So I think it depends on age. I think it's where you are in life. I think it's how much personal growth you've done on your own. I think it's how dialed in you feel with, just understanding what specifically you do want in a partner. So I think there's kind of a lot of different
variables,
factors. Yeah. And just like where you are in life and, what your other stresses are outside of just being in a relationship. Where some people, it's a bit simpler. For others, you're dealing with maybe, traveling a lot for work, or you have a sick parent, or, it really just sort of depends on.
Well, and
right.
Yeah. Well, what's also interesting about everything you're saying is I'm asking this question. I was just realizing under the trait of understanding each other. And I think what it really comes down to is understanding yourself. Like, right. Like this is just the ultimate way that personal development works. Like, you can't understand someone if you don't take the time to get you, because as humans, we're all mirrors. We're all so alike. And so I think with this feedback you're giving around age, life experience, getting to know people, having dated, I think feels so real to me. That feels like the truth, where it's like, if you've had a lot of experience, just like anything, you have more context to make a decision from. And so to me, I think there's definitely people who've had that experience where they just meet the right person and they feel that. But I love this idea that like, it really comes down to your life experience and how much you've invested in this process to understand yourself too, so you can understand someone else, and if it's a good connection for you. And another tip you gave, and for anybody writing notes, she said communication was number one, two kinds, daily, and then like meaning of life. What would be like you said, emotional? Is that the category?
Yes.
Emotional communication. Second one's understanding each other. And then the third is checking in with each other. This one feels really key and so like something I don't think is really happening in this world. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's not. And interestingly, I actually did an entire podcast with a friend of mine who's in the dating space also just around this. So I'll keep it, kind of as compact as I can. But this is like really huge. So basically it's, an exercise that I have couples do initially. I like couples doing it once a week because you really don't know each other that well. You're trying to understand each other. Once you kind of have it more established, you can end up doing it every 2 weeks to a month, depending on kind of where you're at. But first, both of you sit down, no distractions, cell phone off, no TV, nothing going on. It's just you two. And one of you chooses to go first. It doesn't really matter who, you can even alternate. And you have a pen with you, both of you do. And one of you goes first, and first you express what's going well in your relationship. And you do this for two reasons. One is to kind of soften the constructive feedback, let's say, that's coming next. And often we sort of think that our partner knows what we like based on either our reaction or just because we kind of think they should know us by now, but it doesn't always work that way. So if you want more of what you like, it's important to share with your partner what that is, because you can assume that your partner knows, and we were talking about assumptions before, but don't assume, really give your partner direction and let them know why you like that so much. Again, we're talking about, not just why, not just like this hurt me or this excited me or this made me feel blank, but also why it did, for your partner to understand you better and to give kind of more context, right? So and then you're writing, the other person is writing what you're writing, what you're saying, I'm sorry. So you're writing everything down. And then at the end, before you get into the more constructive feedback, you're explaining, so you said, this, and this, and this, and you want me to do it this, and the way. Is that right? Do I have that right? Mm-hmm. And you can then say, yep, that's all correct. Or, yeah, but with this one, I actually meant, blank, blank, and blank. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what you're saying is da-da-da-da. Good. Do I have that right? Yes. Okay. So you move on, and then you do the constructive feedback. So that's anything that's gone on within, that time period. You don't want to take something for 2 years ago. That generally is not that helpful. Anything, right? I mean, unless it's something you really haven't done before, maybe, to an extent, you can bring up the past, but you really want to keep it around, like a bracketed sort of time period, something that's kind of more recent, which is why, you do this as often as, you do. And, give any kind of, feedback in terms of that hurt my feelings, or I didn't really appreciate when you did this, or I don't like when you do that, or, so anything, related to something that you want to see potentially change, not the person, right? We're not changing character traits. That's a bit harder. Women do a lot, but that's really a square peg, round hole type of situation. That's not good. It's more just like habits or things that they've said, or, things that they've done, things, that are a bit smaller. And, doing the same process of, so you said this, and this, do I have that right? And then also looking at what you'd like instead, which is kind of what we were saying before, with an apology. It's not just like, sorry, I hurt you. It's what could I have done differently in this situation to make you feel better or to feel more validated or whatever it may be. And so you repeat that. And then any kind of final, conversation that needs to be had about, the whole check-in on the first person's part. And then the other person repeats the same exact process. And then the next time you guys meet, whether it's a week, 2 weeks, a month, like we were saying, you then review basically how both of you did. And this is all in a very loving way. This is not yelling. This is not screaming. This is not being accusatory or blaming. This is really about really being constructive and frankly proactive with one another. Because often when I work with couples, it's at like the 11th hour when they basically just want to rip each other's heads off. And the way that I kind of explain it is like going, to a doctor where, as a single person, you really don't go, you're not that healthy, you don't, work out, you just kind of, don't do a lot of work towards yourself. And then run to the hospital, you're having a heart attack, save my life right now. It's that kind of thing. Where you're not, taking those proactive steps, you're not doing what you should be doing. There's no maintenance in that. It's more like, you push, and now it's so bad. You hate each other, and then it's like, save us, and it's like, holy moly.
Yeah, totally.
Like it's really, we're like sort of beyond the point.
Yeah, I guess I also want to know, how often would you recommend doing this? And did you say that and I totally lost you on that?
Yeah, I did, but let me do this again.
Yeah.
So at first, I think once a week is nice.
Okay.
Which may sound like it's a lot, and it sort of is, but that's the way you learn, you know what I mean, from each other. Like you're trying to navigate these waters. Then after a little bit of time, I would drop to once every 2 weeks. And then from there, I would drop down probably once a month. But the once a month is forever. You know what I mean? It doesn't go farther than that. I've been with my husband with dating and, sort of the whole time of us knowing each other, almost 4 years, and we do it every month. So, and I intend to do that, for the rest of my life. So start with a week, then drop to 2 weeks, then drop to a month, but it doesn't go beyond that. A month forever.
Got it.
Hey U-Turners, so sorry for the quick interruption, but I want to make sure you know that this episode has been brought to you by the Job Offer Academy, our e-course to help you land a new job you love. So if you're sick of applying for jobs and never hearing back, and you'd like to try a free version of our job hunting course, just head on over to youturnpodcast.com/job offer. That's youturnpodcast.com/job offer. Now let's get back to this week's episode.
You said, just to kind of summarize, because I know so many note takers are on here. So once a week, then once every other week, and then eventually you can get into once a month, and that's permanent. But you recommend first starting with what's going well.
Yep.
And then from there, giving constructive feedback.
Yeah. So basically what's not going well for you.
And then
so what's going well, what's not going well.
And then kind of coming up with a plan of what to do next kind of thing.
Yeah. So, now that I understand all this information, what do I do with this week or 2 weeks or month, time to kind of help with this? So let's say, for example, one of the, things that I didn't like was how messy you are. That's a very abstract type of thing. What does that mean? What specifically, would you want me to do? It's well, let's divide out the chores. Okay, cool. How do we do that? You do the trash. I do the dishwasher. You clean the floors, I dust, whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of coming up with, is it a one-sided thing where it's just something I need to work on? Is it something that we both need to work on? Kind of how do we get to this place depending on what the issues are and what needs to happen?
Helpful. Okay, great. And then I was also just kind of thinking about your fourth tip that I really love for a healthy, traits of a healthy relationship. And I love this one because I don't hear this often. So it's not trite, and it's spontaneity. People talk about spontaneity, but I don't hear a lot of experts telling me this is something to think about, but I absolutely love it because we are so human. We so want variety. And especially me, I'm a Gemini. So every minute of my life is separate from the last minute, Tell us a little bit about what does spontaneity, what can it look like? Because I know some people resonate with the whole thought of spontaneity more than others.
Sure. And I think, again, a lot of this just in general is about doing things proactively. Do you know what I'm saying? As opposed to, before it becomes an issue, which is why I kind of look at these things in an abstract type of way, because you want to make sure, again, that it's not one of these heart attack situations where you're sort of scrambling at the end to try to, figure out what to do. So a lot of this is preventative, type of work. So I'll just start off by saying that. So in terms of being spontaneous, one thing that I find with people just in general, even, someone who's single, we kind of feel robotic with what we do, especially with our work schedules. And if you have kids, it's even more rigorous. It's very much you kind of live off of a to-do list. What's next?
Yeah.
And we end up kind of doing the same things every day. And I feel like a lot of people are sort of half asleep, and sometimes even more than that, where, you kind of don't even realize, it's like 10 a.m. and you've been up since 7 and you're like, I don't even know what I did this morning. You know what I mean? Because it's just so kind of ingrained in your head to like, grab your banana and then, get into the shower and, it's not good. And again, we're sort of not present and we're just kind of going through a day to kind of just go through the motions. So this is kind of about like breaking things up. And a lot of people think that spontaneity has to happen at like 5 or 10 years or something, when it's like, okay, it's kind of, getting like, we've been together a while, like it's getting a little stale. It kind of really needs to come pretty quickly in all aspects of your life, from, your romantic life to, the things you talk about, to the things you do together, to, your sexual relationship. Everything kind of needs to be different, where it's not the same thing over and over, time after time. So can I give some examples?
Yeah. And I even was just feeling my body like respond to you talking about sex, because I know that that's an area where there's like so many stereotypes, but also like people want variety. And it's one of the quickest areas, since it's something that happens for some so frequently, that it shows that there's not novelty or there's not spontaneity. And I laughed to myself because I read somewhere that there's only 6 real positions in sex and everything else is a variation of it. So it's like, how much variety can you have? But I know there's a lot to it. So I would love some feedback on like, what are some like low hanging fruit for people to create that spontaneity?
Yeah. And it's like interesting when you say that, about sexuality. It's like the worst thing in the world when, especially when you're, hooking up with your partner and you kind of like know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing sort of fun about that. I feel like it's very kind of like high school and college, when you kind of like go through the bases, right? It's like, what's going to happen next. Even, just sexually, and I'll give, tips on other things too. But even if you're just sort of changing it up, like, changing up the order of things, you know what I mean? Where sometimes, it's a bit more spontaneous, where you just kind of like go at it and like it's hot and it's, intense. And other times you kind of take your time and the foreplay really is involved in it, so even something like that, and changing up the location, changing up, maybe adding toys in or adding in some food, is fun. So it's really about just kind of changing this up and trying things. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be a hit, but at least you're trying things together to really know what you like, because you kind of don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. So you as a couple, oftentimes we're doing things for the first time. It's really figuring out what works for you guys together, because that could be different than what worked for you in the past with someone else, or even just you by yourself. So it's kind of about changing things up. But in terms of doing other things kind of outside of the bedroom, going on a weekend trip is really fun. Or if you don't have the money to do that, just go, on a day trip somewhere and then come back at the end of the night. But it's doing something that's not like your usual routine. Surprising each other, with little things. It doesn't need to be anything, intense, especially on days where you don't expect it. It's one thing when it's Valentine's Day or your anniversary or your birthday, when you kind of know probably something's coming. It's on like, some random Tuesday when you come home, with your partner's like favorite, cupcake, or, just like a little memento, something cute that, made you think of them. It's, changing up the routine. Like I said, maybe it's having, a date night once a week where you choose one week, they choose another week in terms of what you guys do or where you go. You kind of, again, like really want to change things up. I know it's easier to do that on the weekends, obviously, than during the week. But even on the week, choose something different to do at night, whether it's like playing games or, doing something outside or going for a walk, or, not just kind of doing the Netflix, and chill type of thing that we're all kind of used to doing. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of doing things more in nature and, going outside of your comfort zone, even doing something like a class together, whether it's like a dance class or a cooking class or, improv or something kind of fun where you're learning something new, either together. You can even do things separately one night and kind of talk about, what you guys did separately. So it's really about just kind of breaking up the monotony and doing things that are fun and a bit different and not what you're used to doing all the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also just, I think about like other couples are such a good inspiration for this. Like if you're kind of drawing a blank, like maybe before you come to your partner with this conversation, saying, asking couples, saying, hey, what do you guys do to like create some spontaneity? Like sometimes it's a random trip. Like I was just telling my partner the other day, like, hey, I really want to actually go to New York, which I know that's where you are, Diana. And I was like, haven't been to New York in a minute. Like maybe we need to go to New York next weekend. And I know that sometimes that's more of an expense for some people than others, but there's also like a ton of free stuff. And even like websites like meetup.com that have people getting together. Like there's just so much out there. It's really kind of a trip when you think about like how much we actually can do and we just get so comfortable. So this is great. And I mean, even sometimes for people who don't like love spontaneity, I think like if you usually eat dinner inside, maybe just eating it outside. Like that's just a basic pattern interrupt, you know?
Absolutely.
So that's great. And then as far as your fifth tip that you talked about for traits of a healthy relationship, you said improving upon yourselves. And this is huge. And I know how powerful it is. So what does that look like? Because anybody listening to this podcast, they're clearly working on self-improvement. And I think one of the biggest pain points I have seen in a lot of my friends' partnerships is they might pick somebody that doesn't have this same interest. And it can be such a pain point in the connection.
I completely agree. And oftentimes, with my clients that are single, I see the same thing, that it's like, we need to find someone who, believes in this. And even if it's someone who kind of hasn't done an amazing job at that, but really wants to work on that, like, I'll take that too. It's really someone who kind of makes fun of you or thinks it's, kind of willy-nilly and, kind of stupid to do. That's where the problem occurs, because it's a lifestyle change. It's very different from what, some other people in terms of like outlook and so forth. So yeah, you definitely want to choose someone who's either already into self-improvement or is definitely willing to explore it. And because it's also supportive on your end too. It's not even just that they're not willing to do it. They kind of think that it's foolish. And so it doesn't feel good on your end when you're like kicking butt and really doing well in it and they're kind of not getting it. They're not seeing it. It's not a good feeling. So you definitely want to be with someone who wants to improve upon themselves. And then in terms of kind of how to do that, I think oftentimes when we're in long-term relationships, we kind of get lazy. Like people will stop working out, they'll stop improving upon themselves, they'll stop, kind of doing things independent of their partner. We kind of almost like mold into like one person in a sense, and kind of think that we don't need to do certain things anymore because we kind of quote unquote like have this person. But I don't want you to ever think as though you have them, and not where you feel very unsafe and sort of unsure about things either. You want to feel secure in your relationship, but know that you being the best version of yourself to bring that into a relationship with someone is the best thing to do. And it's interesting because, like I said initially, that I was kind of a shit magnet, in my 20s. So being in really bad relationships versus being in good relationships, what I learned in that, and a real shift in that, which I hope helps people, is that when you're in a bad relationship, or let's call it an unhealthy relationship for lack of a better term, it almost doesn't matter what kind of version of yourself you bring, because you're going to be fighting. There's going to be drama. It's just not going to work as well as it should. So it sort of doesn't really matter. When you're in a healthy relationship with someone, I almost like, I obviously thought it would be a lot easier. And in some ways, it's a lot more enjoyable. I can tell you that. And like sustainable and so forth, but it's actually a lot harder in some ways because you are so much more responsible for yourself. Like I realize if I come home from, work or a meeting or something, and I'm just like stressed out or something didn't go exactly how I wanted or whatever it may be, like I'm bringing that to my partner, kind of like the Tasmanian devil, kind of like, spinning through our house and kind of, screwing up like the vibe. And even though I'm allowed to obviously be human and not have a good, day or night or meeting or moment, you kind of want to either lean on your partner to be able to kind of talk through it with each other and be able to move on, or you kind of pick and choose what to sort of bring. You know what I mean? You don't want to have it be heavy every day, because there's basically stuff every day to be, upset about, but there's also a million things to be happy about. So I think it really depends on your outlook and, kind of picking and choosing what to make a thing. And frankly, that's within your relationship as well. People are always going to do things to kind of upset you, annoy you, that kind of thing, generally, hopefully unintentionally. So you do want to bring these things up, but it's like there's times where you just kind of want to let things go. You can't sort of battle everything. You want to advocate for yourself, but not where it just kind of seems all the time, because maybe you're not with the right person if you feel like that's what it is. So it's really, again, like bringing the best version of yourself to your relationship to, thrive and to grow. And you want really the same of your partner as well. So when you're doing work on your own, which is why I think everyone should have some sort of coach in their life, whether it's mindset, dating, whatever it may be, to kind of be the best version of yourself and to have someone else kind of sift through your feelings. more so than you kind of relying on your partner to do that. That's not your partner's job. You know what I mean? It's not part of the description. Are they there to, help you and support you and love you and be your cheerleader? Absolutely. But not the person to kind of throw like your stuff on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've definitely done that before because I didn't really know how to focus on myself and work on myself. And I, wasn't going to outside sources to do that. So I was kind of dumping everything on, the person I was, at the time dating. And that was really not fair. So a lot of this is just taking time to do, self-care and to improve upon yourself and to, be more self-aware and to look at, why you do some of the things that you do. And, if you're feeling something or someone's coming up for you, that you're being proactive in it and doing something about it. There's action attached to a lot of the things that we're feeling. And kind of being the best version of yourself on your own to kind of bring the best version of yourself into a relationship with someone.
I love this. Okay. And for anybody who's listening, that maybe one way they improve themselves is listening to this podcast, and they're looking for maybe one other practice that would really move the needle for them in their lives, what would be one, like practice or thought that you would have for them to consider as another way to work on themselves?
So there's a bunch of things. There are things you can do on your own. Obviously, if you find that you are struggling on your own, I would definitely reach out to someone professionally, but you can, there's so many things. Practice self-care is definitely a huge one. I think a lot of it too is making sure that you have your independence. So like keep your friendships, make sure you're seeing your family, doing things that you love to do outside of your relationship. And also making sure that your version of self-love is there. And it's a little bit different than, self-care. Self-care is important, but where you're kind of like loving on yourself and knowing that you're not with this person to make you feel good about yourself. You know what I mean? That you've healed, that you've done the work on your own. And, that you can do mirror work where you stand in front of the mirror. This is actually a really powerful exercise, is to stand in front of the mirror, sort of look at yourself and visualize yourself as the little person that you are. Call you like 6 or 7. So, what did your hair look like? What kind of outfit did you wear? Like really visualize yourself and give yourself the things that you didn't have when you were young. Let this little girl or boy know that you have their back, and let them know, like, what did they need at that point? Because generally by 6 or 7, we kind of have most of our attachment styles, and, you're pretty set in stone, besides obviously experiences that happen later. But in terms of, like mentors and parents and things of that nature, a lot of that is actually, made up by that point. So it's looking at, what needs to be healed and, what do you not feel enough about, right? We all have like, I'm not blank enough, whatever it is, thin enough, valuable enough, important enough, smart enough. So it's looking at that and giving yourself as the adult that you are the things that you know that this child needed to hear and to know. So it's a really important thing to kind of like feed your soul, you know what I'm saying? So that you're allowing your partner to sort of enhance all that love that you already have, not give you that because you basically are too afraid or unsure of how to do the work on your own. Because it's definitely something,
Powerful.
that I did, know, in my 20s, was kind of rely on someone else. And I see that a lot. And oftentimes we don't even realize we're doing it because we do feel confident in certain areas. So we think, oh, like, I'm confident in this and this. So, I'm not doing that, to my partner. But often we are. So you're kind of looking towards your history to look at repeated patterns too of other relationships you've been in and how you've handled things with other people, whether it's romantic or not. And then being able to kind of, solve some of those things and heal some of those things.
This is so good. Well, I mean, I'm sure everybody's listening to this. They're writing about the 2 types of communication, understanding each other. They're going to hopefully implement a check-in at least once a month, if not more, and spontaneity and improving on themselves. And Dana, this has been so great. Where can everybody find you, work with you, learn from you?
So DinaMandell.com is my website where you can learn more about me. There's blog posts on there. You can see how to work with me. And then Dina Mandell is also my Instagram handle if you want to follow me on there.
Woohoo! Thank you again for all of your time. This has been so great.
Thank you for having me.
Hey guys, it's Ash here, just reflecting on the episode with Dina Mandell, and I loved her original take on communication and how there's many different types and layers
of communication and relationships. For example, how she distinguished the difference between daily communication and emotional communication, talking about how sometimes we get lost in the day-to-day of our lives and we forget to go deeper and ask our partners how their day makes them feel or how different situations make them feel. And I think it's so important to connect on that level. And also her feedback on checking in and creating that structure to check in with each other on an ongoing basis. It's just so beautiful. I think that, just kind of stepping out of this episode and looking, I know there's a percent of you who aren't in a healthy relationship, and whether you're not or you're kind of in that process of discovering. I just wanted to share a few things. I've talked a little bit about narcissists, and not everybody is a narcissist. Some people that are toxic. Some people are just narcissistic, but they don't have the personality disorder. And so I wanted to just shine a little bit of light on some different factors that can cause someone to actually carry toxicity into a relationship. So first could be their environment. That means mismatches in parent-child relationships or excessive criticism that hurts the child's experience, lots of trauma. There's also genetics. There's inherited characteristics. And if there's anything that I've learned about the brain, it's that there's a doctor out there who's doing brain scans, and his work is incredible. And I heard about him on the Broken Brain podcast, and he talks about how everybody's brain looks different, and he can see based on your brain the quality of your thoughts and the quality of your life. So it's not just like we choose our thoughts. It sometimes has to do with our genetics, our biology, and our actual brain chemistry that we're working with and working against in some cases. This kind of also goes beyond genetics and into neurobiology, the connection between the brain and the behavior and your thinking. But if I want to just point out that there's a level of healthy narcissism that isn't toxic. For example, I have a personal brand. There's a level of healthy fucking narcissism that had to go into me creating my own brand as a business owner. So where does it get unhealthy? Where does suddenly a relationship become toxic? I wanted to point out some different things, and it doesn't mean that if you have one of them that you're toxic or your partner's toxic, but it does mean that you should take a look at it. So the people who tend to either have narcissistic personality disorder or be toxic, they have usually around 9 traits. The first one is an exaggerated sense of self-importance, an exaggerated focus on themselves. If you come to them about you, it always ends up being about themselves. Sometimes this is just basic wounding. Somebody has anxiety and you come to them about something, and then all of a sudden they're in all this anxiety. So you want to pay attention to this and how they talk. Usually it comes from a tone of ego. Not to say that, if you end up going to somebody who's your partner and they end up making it about them, that's not something you should be having a conversation about. It doesn't always mean that they're toxic though, but it is something to pay attention to. Another one is having a sense of entitlement or requiring constant excessive admiration. Also expecting to be recognized as superior, even without achievements that warrant it. Not that any achievement can make you superior. Somebody who exaggerates their achievements and their talents. Someone who's preoccupied, and this is a big one, with fantasies of success, fantasies of power, fantasies of their brilliance, their beauties, or this is a big one, the perfect mate. I think a lot of narcissists think that there's this perfect person out there, and they put their partner up against that fantasy vision. And it's this constant thing that their partner has to strive for. And they'll talk about their partner like, my partner or my wife would never do this to me, sort of thing. Another is believing they're superior and that they should only associate with equally special people, monopolizing conversations, belittling, looking down on people they perceive as inferior, expecting special favors, expecting unquestioning compliance, taking advantage of others to get what they want, having an inability or unwillingness to recognize the needs and feelings of others, being envious of others and believing others envy them, behaving in arrogant or haughty manners. That means they come across maybe as conceited, or they insist on having the best of everything. For example, the best car, the best office. Another thing that is an indicator is people who have narcissistic personality disorder struggle to handle anything they perceive as criticism. So they're very unable to take constructive feedback. So they can become impatient or angry when they don't get special treatment. They have significant interpersonal problems. They easily feel slighted by somebody else. They react with rage or contempt and try to belittle the other person or make themselves appear superior. They have difficulty regulating their emotions, their behavior. They experience major problems dealing with stress and adapting to change. They feel depressed or moody because they fall short of perfection. They have secret feelings of insecurity, shame, vulnerability, humiliation, all of these different things. Here's the deal. If you're with somebody who has narcissistic traits, or you start to think that your relationship might be toxic, I hope you get help. Talk to a therapist. I know we had Nicole Naupavar on an episode, just about codependency. I think that's something that a lot of narcissists, people who are about themselves and have the disorder, are attracted to people who are empaths, because that's the perfect codependent match. And if you don't know about codependency and codependent behavior patterns, I hope you tune into my episode with Nicole Naupavar, because I thought she really beautifully painted a picture of how it looks, how it works, what codependency is. But I feel like Diane just painted such a beautiful picture of a great relationship. And I know that there is a large percentage of you out there who are not in a great relationship. And that's why I wanted to bring light to this topic, because I think it's so important that we, in order to achieve the life that we really want, we start to look at certain things that we don't want, and I think that this is all just part of it. And there's so many statistics, about toxic relationships, and they continue to shock me. For example, in Psychology Today, I was reading a little bit about mental disorders, and I think it's so important that we just kind of pause, and I'm pausing, and really look at the numbers. So for example, on average, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. So that's 24 people every single minute you're sitting there. That's more than 12 million women and men over the course of a year in the United States. 3 in 10 women, 29%, and 1 in 10 men, 10%, have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking. 15% of women have been injured as a result of IPV that included, so IPV meaning just violence, including rape, physical violence, stalking. These numbers go on, and it is so important for us to raise awareness. I've also read that nearly 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men, of course, way less men, have been raped in their lifetime. Think about that. If you walk past 5 women today, nearly 1 of them has likely been raped in her life. And 1 out of 10 women have been raped by their intimate partner in their lifetime. Usually that looks like they weren't ready, there wasn't consent, and I think a lot of people, I had a really profound experience in my master's in spiritual psychology where a woman was talking to me about how in our class she had realized that her first sexual experience when she lost her virginity was rape, because they didn't talk about it and it just kind of happened and she wasn't ready for it. So, these are things, they cause, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't mean to be a bummer, but I do just want to bring awareness. There's just so much here. And, even think about children, 1 out of 4 usually witness violence among intimate partners in their household. So we live in a world where it is so important as women that we take a fucking stand for toxic relationships. We really get honest with ourselves about what is going on in our relationships. Is it healthy? Does it support our well-being? And if it doesn't, we are willing to be courageous and step out. So get help if you're in a toxic relationship. Ask around for a therapist. Like I said, my friend Nicole Naupavar, she does that. There's so much support out there. And I'm just sending you a lot of love, and hope that you send this episode to somebody who needs it.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. We keep really detailed show notes at uturnpodcast.com. So if our guest mentioned a book or a resource that you're interested in, you'll be able to find that there. In the meantime, if you were inspired by this episode, if it made an impact in your life, we would be so grateful if you subscribed and posted a review for us on iTunes. Rumor has it on the street, the more reviews we get, the more subscribes we get, the more we can grow and get our impact out there in the world. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from you at Ashley Stahl on Instagram. I'm so grateful for connecting, and I look forward to next week's episode.